Life seemed perfect, or at least as close to perfect as it could get. Sarah and I had been married for 8 years, and while we had our ups and downs, I always believed we were solid. She was my best friend, my partner, the person I trusted more than anyone else in the world. We had built a life together, a cozy home, shared routines, and even those little inside jokes that only the two of us understood. Every morning, she'd make coffee while I scrambled eggs, and we'd sit at the kitchen table talking about our plans for the day. It was simple, but it was ours. I thought we were happy. I thought we were real. But looking back, there were signs, tiny cracks in the foundation that I chose to ignore. Sarah had always been ambitious, and I admired that about her. She worked hard, climbing the corporate ladder with determination. Her boss, Mark, was a well-known figure in her industry, someone she often spoke about with a mix of respect and frustration. He was demanding, she said, but he pushed her to be her best. I never thought much of it. After all, she was thriving, and I was proud of her. But over the past few months, something had shifted. She started working late more often, coming home with excuses about deadlines and meetings. Her phone, which she used to leave casually on the counter, was now always face down, as if hiding something. And her smiles, those warm, genuine smiles I loved, seemed forced, like she was going through the motions. I told myself it was just stress. Her job was demanding, and I knew how much pressure she was under. I tried to be supportive, picking up extra chores around the house and giving her space when she needed it. But there were moments when I caught her staring off into the distance, her mind somewhere far away. When I asked if everything was okay, she brushed me off with a quick, "I'm fine," or "just tired." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we were still the same team we'd always been, but deep down, a small, nagging voice whispered that something was wrong. One evening, I came home early from work, hoping to surprise her with dinner. The house was empty, and when I called her, she said she was stuck at the office. "Mark needs me to stay late," she explained, her voice tinged with what sounded like guilt. I told her it was fine, that I understood, but as I sat alone at the table, eating the meal I'd prepared for us, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Why did it feel like she was pulling away? Why did it feel like I was losing her? I tried to push those thoughts aside, convincing myself that I was overthinking things. We were still us, weren't we? We still laughed together, still shared those quiet moments at the end of the day. But the distance between us grew, little by little, like a shadow creeping across the room. She started going out more often, work dinners, networking events, team-building activities. Each time she'd come home late, her makeup slightly smudged, her energy drained. I wanted to trust her, to believe that she was just doing what she needed to do for her career, but the doubts lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. One night, as I lay in bed waiting for her to come home, I found myself scrolling through old photos of us. There we were, smiling on our wedding day, laughing on vacations, holding hands at family gatherings. We looked so happy, so in love. Where had that gone? When had we started drifting apart? I didn't have the answers, but I knew I couldn't keep ignoring the signs. Something was wrong, and I needed to figure out what it was before it was too late. But even as I resolved to talk to her, to confront the growing distance between us, I hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if I was just being paranoid? I didn't want to accuse her of something she hadn't done, to risk damaging the trust we'd built over the years. So I stayed silent, hoping that things would get better on their own, hoping that the woman I married was still the same person I thought I knew. But as the days turned into weeks, the cracks grew wider, and the facade of our perfect life began to crumble. Little did I know, the truth was far worse than I could have imagined. The night of the concert was supposed to be a break from the heaviness that had settled over my life. Sarah had mentioned a work event she couldn't miss, so I decided to go alone. It had been a while since I'd done something just for myself, and I thought the music, the energy of the crowd, might help clear my head. The venue was packed, the air buzzing with anticipation. I found a spot near the stage, close enough to feel the vibrations of the bass, but far enough to avoid the crush of bodies. For a little while, I let myself get lost in the music, the pounding rhythm drowning out the noise in my mind. But as the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being alone in a sea of people. Couples around me were laughing, dancing, sharing moments that felt so far removed from my own reality. I tried to push the thoughts away, focusing on the band, the lights, anything to distract myself. Then, during a slow song, something made me glance toward the VIP section. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was the universe's cruel sense of timing. But whatever it was, my eyes landed on a sight that made my stomach drop. There she was, Sarah, my wife, sitting on her boss's lap. His arms were wrapped around her, one hand resting casually on her thigh, the other brushing her hair aside as she leaned into him. Her face was buried in his neck, her body pressed against his in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. The world around me seemed to freeze, the music fading into a dull hum as my heart pounded in my ears. I stared, unable to look away, unable to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. But it was. Every detail burned itself into my mind, the way her fingers gripped his shoulder, the way his lips brushed against her ear as he whispered something that made her laugh. The intimacy of it was like a knife to the chest. How long had this been going on? How many times had she lied to me, told me she was working late or at a team dinner, when she was really with him? The questions swirled in my head, each one more painful than the last. I felt like a fool, standing there with my drink in hand, while my wife betrayed me in the most public way possible. Anger surged through me, hot and blinding. I wanted to storm over there to confront them, to demand answers. But my feet felt rooted to the spot, my body paralyzed by a mix of shock and disbelief. This wasn't just about her cheating. It was about the betrayal of trust, the years of lies, the way she had made me feel like I was imagining things when I sensed something was wrong. All those late nights, the guarded phone, the forced smiles, it all made sense now. And it hurt more than I could have ever imagined. The crowd around me swayed to the music, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath my feet. Part of me wanted to leave, to walk away and never look back. But another part, the part that was tired of being in the dark, tired of feeling powerless, refused to let this slide. If she could humiliate me like this, in front of hundreds of people, then she deserved to face the consequences. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. As the song ended and the crowd erupted into applause, I made my decision. I pushed my way through the sea of bodies, my eyes locked on the stage. The lead singer was thanking the audience, his voice echoing through the speakers. I didn't think about what I was doing, I just acted. Before I knew it, I was climbing onto the stage, the spotlight blinding me as I grabbed the mic from his hands. The crowd gasped, the band stopped playing, and for a moment, there was silence. Then I spoke, my voice trembling with rage, but loud enough to fill the entire venue. "Want a show," I shouted, and the crowd roared in response. Their confusion turned to excitement, their cheers fueling my adrenaline. I pointed to the VIP section, my hand shaking as I aimed it at Sarah and her boss. "That liar, my wife, is on that jerk's lap. Shall we teach them a lesson?" The crowd erupted, their energy feeding into mine. In that moment, I didn't care about the consequences. I didn't care about anything except making them feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about taking back control, about refusing to be the victim anymore. And as the crowd chanted and shouted, I knew there was no turning back. The moment I grabbed the mic, everything shifted. The stage lights burned bright, blinding me for a second, but I didn't care. The crowd's energy was electric, their confusion quickly turning into anticipation. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting to see what would happen next. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling, but there was no hesitation now. This was my moment, my chance to take back control, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. I pointed toward the VIP section, my arms steady despite the storm raging inside me. "That liar, my wife, is on that jerk's lap," I said, my voice booming through the speakers. The words felt heavy, final, like I was ripping off a bandage that had been covering a festering wound. The crowd followed my gaze, their murmurs growing louder as they realized what was happening. I could see Sarah's face now, her expression a mix of shock and horror. Her boss, Mark, looked equally stunned, his arms frozen in place as if he didn't know whether to push her away or hold her tighter. For a split second, I felt a pang of guilt. Was I going too far? But then I remembered the way she had lied to me, the way she had made me feel invisible, and any doubt vanished. "Shall we teach them a lesson?" I asked, my voice rising above the noise. The crowd roared in response, their cheers and shouts echoing through the venue. It was like I had unleashed something primal, something raw and unfiltered. People were chanting, pointing, some even laughing as they turned their attention to the VIP section. Sarah and Mark were no longer hidden in the shadows. They were the center of attention, exposed for everyone to see, and I was the one holding the spotlight. The band had stopped playing, the lead singer standing awkwardly to the side, unsure of what to do. Security guards were making their way toward the stage, but the crowd was too energized, too caught up in the drama to let them through easily. I didn't care if they dragged me off the stage. I didn't care if I got kicked out of the venue. All that mattered was this moment, this chance to make them feel the same humiliation and pain they had caused me. As the chaos unfolded, I felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity. For weeks, maybe even months, I had felt like a fool, like I was the last one to know what was really going on. But now, I was the one in control. I was the one calling the shots. And it felt good. It felt powerful. The crowd's energy fed into mine, their shouts and jeers amplifying my own anger. I could see Sarah trying to stand, her face flushed with embarrassment, but the crowd's reaction kept her pinned in place. Mark was saying something to her, his face red with anger, but his words were drowned out by the noise. I didn't stop there. I kept going, my voice steady now, my words cutting through the chaos. "This is what happens when you betray someone who loves you," I said, my eyes locked on Sarah. "This is what happens when you think you can get away with it." The crowd cheered again, their enthusiasm almost overwhelming. It was like they were living vicariously through me, feeding off my pain and turning it into something collective, something shared. And in that moment, I didn't feel alone anymore. I felt seen, heard, understood. Security finally reached the stage, their hands grabbing my arms as they tried to pull me away. I didn't resist. I had said what I needed to say, done what I needed to do. As they led me off the stage, the crowd erupted into applause, their cheers following me like a wave. I glanced back one last time, my eyes meeting Sarah's. She looked devastated, her face pale, her hands trembling. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of sadness, not for her, but for what we had lost. But then it was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This was the end of us, and I was okay with that. As I was escorted out of the venue, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving me drained but strangely satisfied. I had done it. I had exposed the truth, not just to myself, but to everyone who mattered. The revenge was messy, public, and maybe even a little cruel, but it was mine. And as I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't felt in months. This wasn't the end of my story, but it was the end of this chapter. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. The moment I stepped off the stage, the chaos I had unleashed continued to ripple through the venue. The crowd's energy was electric, their shouts and jeers echoing in my ears as security led me away. I could still hear the commotion behind me, the chants, the laughter, the occasional burst of anger from someone in the crowd. It was like I had lit a fuse, and now the explosion was out of my control. But I didn't care. I had done what I needed to do, and the aftermath was no longer my concern. As I was escorted out of the building, my mind raced with a mix of emotions. There was satisfaction, of course, a deep, primal sense of justice that came from seeing Sarah and Mark exposed in such a public way. But there was also a hollow ache, a reminder of what I had lost. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about the end of a relationship I had once believed in, a future I had once imagined. And as much as I wanted to revel in the moment, I couldn't ignore the pain that lingered beneath the surface. Outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap, snapping me back to reality. The security guards released me with a warning, their voices stern but tinged with a hint of sympathy. I didn't stick around to argue or explain myself. I just walked, my feet carrying me aimlessly through the streets as I tried to process everything that had happened. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving me drained and shaky. My hands were still trembling, my heart still pounding, but the anger that had fueled me earlier was beginning to subside. I found myself replaying the scene in my mind, the way Sarah had looked when she realized what was happening, the way Mark had tried to shield her from the crowd's judgment. It was a moment I would never forget, not just because of the revenge, but because of what it represented. It was the moment I had finally taken control. The moment I had refused to be the victim anymore. And as much as it hurt, it also felt like a release, like I had finally let go of something that had been weighing me down for far too long. But the night wasn't over. As I walked, my phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket. I pulled it out, glancing at the screen to see a flood of notifications, texts, calls, social media alerts. The video of what had happened at the concert was already going viral, spreading like wildfire across the internet. People were sharing it, commenting on it, dissecting every detail. Some were praising me for my boldness, calling me a hero for standing up to betrayal. Others were criticizing me, saying I had gone too far, that I had humiliated Sarah and Mark in a way that was cruel and unnecessary. I didn't care about their opinions. This wasn't about them. This was about me, about my pain, my story. I stopped walking, leaning against a lamppost as I scrolled through the comments. There were messages from friends and family, some supportive, others concerned. Sarah had tried to call me multiple times, but I ignored her. I wasn't ready to hear her excuses, her apologies. Not yet. Maybe not ever. For now, I just wanted to sit with what had happened, to let it sink in and process it in my own way. As the night wore on, I found myself thinking about the future. What happened next? Where did I go from here? The divorce was inevitable, I knew that much, but beyond that, everything was uncertain. I had spent so much of my life tied to Sarah, building a future around her, that I wasn't sure who I was without her. But maybe that was the point. Maybe this was my chance to start over, to figure out who I was on my own terms. By the time I made it home, the sun was starting to rise, casting a pale light over the empty streets. The house felt different now, quieter, emptier. It was no longer the home I had shared with Sarah. It was just a place, a shell of what it had once been. I walked through the rooms, my footsteps echoing in the silence, and realized that this was the beginning of a new chapter. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be painless, but it was necessary. I sat down on the couch, my body heavy with exhaustion, and closed my eyes. The events of the night played on a loop in my mind. The concert, the confrontation, the chaos. It had been messy, public, and maybe even a little reckless, but it had also been cathartic. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own life. And as I drifted off to sleep, I knew that whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. The revenge had been epic, but it was just the beginning. The real work, the healing, the rebuilding was still ahead. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready for it. The days that followed the concert were a blur, a whirlwind of emotions and decisions that left me feeling both drained and strangely liberated. Sarah tried to reach out, her calls and texts growing more desperate as the reality of what had happened sank in. She wanted to explain, to apologize, to somehow make things right, but every time I saw her name on my screen, I felt a surge of anger and betrayal that made it impossible to respond. The trust between us was shattered, and no amount of words could piece it back together. The video of the concert had gone viral, spreading across social media like wildfire. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, some offering support, others just curious for the juicy details. I ignored most of them, focusing instead on the practicalities of untangling my life from Sarah's. The divorce process was messy, as I knew it would be, but I was determined to see it through. Every document I signed, every meeting with my lawyer, felt like a step toward reclaiming my independence. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Sarah's affair had been exposed in the most public way possible, and while part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, I couldn't ignore the pain that came with it. The betrayal still stung, a constant ache that lingered no matter how much I tried to push it aside. I found myself replaying memories of our relationship, questioning everything I thought I knew about her, about us. Had she ever truly loved me, or had I just been a placeholder, someone to keep her company until something better came along? I didn't have the answers, and maybe I never would. But as the weeks turned into months, I began to find a sense of peace. The anger that had consumed me started to fade, replaced by a quiet determination to move forward. I threw myself into work, into hobbies, into anything that would keep my mind occupied. I reconnected with friends I had drifted away from, people who reminded me of who I was outside of my marriage. Slowly, I started to rebuild my life, piece by piece. The revenge had been epic, a moment of raw, unfiltered emotion that I would never forget. But it wasn't the end of my story. It was a turning point, a catalyst for change that forced me to confront the truth and take control of my own life. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. The pain of betrayal would always be a part of me, but it didn't define me. I was more than the sum of my heartbreak, and I was ready to prove it.